Good morning, sort of, everybody. We
Technically.
are doing a kind of, I wouldn't say special live stream, but an earlier live stream due to scheduling that we had to work around. Um, Welcome to the Lanky and the OddCrapple podcast. I am Crash, known as the OddCrapple,
And I'm Lanky, known as
and
Lanky.
and he's a little bit slow, but it's okay. He hasn't had his coffee today.
It's the audio.
uh, Yeah, like I said, we're doing a little bit earlier because of different scheduling. So uh, you know, if anybody misses it, they'll see it on um, the YouTube channel as an uploaded video after we stream. So nobody's gonna miss out. Uh, Today we are talking about kind of the I don't I don't want to sound cynical or negative, but to me it's the disgusting trend of remakes and the lack of originality in TV and in cinema. And we will touch briefly on, you know, the a lot of the reasons that seem to motivate these remakes. So we'll discuss a lot of different reasons. Please know that these are just opinions, and Lanky and I both probably will have differing opinions on these topics, but I feel like there is at least a mutual understanding as far as understanding each other's perspective um, and understanding the overall impact that these remakes and reboots and all this stuff have because when you think of art, you want it to be original. You want each thing to tell a different story. And I feel like art in any medium um, should be able to do that. That's why and if you want to go back to an example of high school, that's why they say when you're in high school, when you're writing reports, don't plagiarize because plagiarism is wrong, and actually plagiarism is illegal. If they're doing, for me, I'm saying this half seriously, half jokingly, if you're going to plagiarize a movie or a TV show, honestly, you should get in a little trouble for it.
Hmm.
um, but we're basically gonna, focus on the remakes and the reboots that we are aware of, and some maybe that we weren't aware of. I have um, lists pulled up on my tabs that I can reference. So we'll go through the ones that we know of and ones that we maybe weren't as familiar with. Um, I know based on, just quick research that there are movies that exist today that are actually remakes of movies that were made back in the early 1900s. And, they are such standalones that you don't necessarily need to know that they're remakes because there's an originality to them because it's a more modern take on something. It's kind of like when, you know, there's a movie based on a Shakespeare play. It's not the Shakespeare play verbatim, but it's a movie based on it. It's an interpretation of it. And I love that type of stuff. Um, I know that I think back when we were growing up, um, was it? Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio that were in Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
So, there are adaptations that, are made from, book to screen or book to TV. And I think that if you're transferring, from one medium to the other, there has to be some concessions that you have to make. But the concessions that you have to make, I think that you have to strengthen the missing parts in a certain way to make it work. Like you're not going to get I don't think you're going to get the same impact from the story that you would from a book. I think it's the same when you have reboots of, movies or TV shows. And I'll even go so far as to say I think that bringing animated into real life, animated into live action, I guess they call it. There are even concessions that you have to make in that regard that you need to know how to properly, make up for. And I don't think that we are quite there yet, because, the two most recent examples that come to mind are the live action remake of The Lion King and the live action remake of Aladdin. Now, I have not seen either of these. I loved the cartoon, like the animated movie of The Lion King, and Aladdin is actually one of my favorite animated movies. When it came to hearing about the fact that they were doing a live action version of The Lion King, I had to ask myself why, because obviously a kid realizes that animals don't talk. So why the hell are you making a live action version with real animals or even CGI animals that look real when animals don't talk? It's not something you can base in reality. And as far as Aladdin, I know that obviously you can't base a gigantic blue genie in reality because it doesn't exist. But I think the overall story, I'm from what I understand, did translate well, and they were able to, I guess because it was humans instead of animals, they were actually able to translate the story well into live action. And the one reason I want to see it is because the girl who plays Jasmine played the Pink Ranger in the 2017 Power Rangers movie, and I absolutely fell in love with her. So that's one of the main reasons I want to see it, because just to see her play Jasmine is going to be a thrill for me. But to start off there, I want to know what your thoughts are on those two examples, and then we'll go into other ones.
Oh, well, for my part, and I'm sorry to say I actually haven't seen them either. I did see Beauty and the Beast in theaters, and I think that was their first foray into the live action remake of their animated.
Yeah, and like I said, I want to see that because of, or I do want to see that because of Emma Watson. But so because I have heard at least decent things about that.
Yeah. My main criticism of the remake was that it was almost a verbatim scene by scene remake of the animated movie. And I kind of regretted seeing it in theaters because I just felt like it was a cash grab. I think there was one additional scene that they added, but but for my part, I was hoping it would be maybe like a more adult retelling of the story, or go into more depth of every one of the characters or something like that. But it didn't really. Great casting, I have to admit, but I felt like, well, if I wanted to watch Disney's Beauty and the Beast, I could have just seen the animated movie downstairs.
Mhm.
So, um, but um, but that kind of gave me the motivation not to see The Lion King or Aladdin in theaters, because I thought maybe they would just do the same thing. I still want to see them, but
Yeah.
I don't want to give $13 to a theater when I can just watch it for free on my TV.
Yeah,
So,
or when it comes out on streaming.
yeah.
Um, but like I said, I will eventually see the Aladdin one just because of the girl that plays Jasmine. Um, and I love that story, and I would like to see how they adapted it into the real world because like I said, I think there are concessions that you have to make when bringing something from animated into, to be able to base something in reality. But I think
Yeah.
that with Aladdin, the story itself it could have been based in reality. So I think that's why it can work in either medium, whether it be animated or live action. I think it can be based in reality.
You know,
Uh, with Lion King though, you can't base it in reality because again, animals aren't animals don't talk. You have animatronic, but those are like animal robots that have maybe human-like characteristics through, you know, electronic means.
I think it would have been quite the feat if Disney had done a mix of like Milo and Otis and Babe, where you had like Dudley Moore do the voiceovers for Simba and
Well,
Rafiki
and
and
I mean, I actually didn't even think about Babe. It's like, I mean, I know we're talking about reboots and remakes, but it makes you wonder why they made a live action movie of a pig that talks. Because even
Ah,
Charlotte's Web, I believe, was animated.
yeah. Actually, I don't know if Babe itself was actually based on a book or not. Hold on.
Because I know that they had at least two Babe movies because they had Babe and then they had Babe Pig in the City.
Okay, so Babe is an adaptation of the 1983 novel, The Sheep Pig, by Dick Kingsmith, 1983. So it's also known as Babe the Gallant Pig in the U.S., which tells the story of a pig raised as livestock who wants to do work of a sheepdog. Uh, Interesting. So yes, I guess Babe is actually based on a book,
Yeah. Well,
technically.
I mean that's good. Like I said earlier, I think that although when you're switching from one medium to to another, there are concessions you have to make. I do think that there are some mediums that you can switch from and switch to that are easier than others.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if I mean for the most part, I think you can go from live action to animated without having to make too many concessions. But if it's something that is really based in reality, you need to be careful because I think that takes away from the legitimacy of the story, maybe in some way.
Yeah. Well, I know for my part, and this might sound, maybe a more superficial take on the whole thing, but
Hmm.
when you do an animated movie, you really it takes a lot of work. For one thing, you're doing frame by frame, and the main focus is the line and the color. Whereas in live action, you have the opportunity to enhance things a bit. So
Yeah.
when you look at Aladdin as the cartoon, he
Hmm.
had white pants and a purple vest.
Hmm.
But then in the live action movie, you see a much more realistic take on the vests, the
It's more
clothing.
it's more kind of a 3D thing. Like it's more like you can reach out and touch it because it's an actual person that you're seeing.
Yeah, like it's no, it's not solid color heavy. It's a lot of stitching and gold leaf, whatever. Much more detail in real life, because you have that luxury where there's no animation because people operate in 3.5 dimensions. So all you have to do is act, and then you get the costuming and that sort of thing. So I would say the realism they tried for in Aladdin, I thought worked really well.
If you could do a quick search for me, see, I think I know it, but I'm not sure. See if you can find out when the original animated Lion King was released. I think it was 95.
I think it might be 93. But hold on.
Was it 93? I want to argue, not argue, but I tend to have a different opinion on that, only based on what I'm about to tell you.
Oh, wait a minute. Nope. We're both wrong. I think it was 94.
Well, either way, it wasn't 93, and there's a reason I know that. And this is something I don't think I've ever actually told you. My mom and my grandmother brought me to Disney World in 93, in the summer of 93. And we actually were taken on a tour of Disney Animation Studios. And we actually saw them pencil drawing the beginnings of the Lion King animated movie.
Very cool.
So that was a thrill for me at 8 years old, knowing that a year or two later I would actually see that movie come out, knowing that I had seen its infancy essentially.
I knew it came out after Aladdin, but yeah, I didn't know what specific year, because sadly I did not see it in theaters.
I actually never saw it in theaters. I waited till it came out on video, but I wasn't at that age. I don't think I really went to the movie theater until I was about 10 or 11 for the first time, because I wasn't really a movie theater type of kid until I was older. But I think that was just, I think seeing what goes into art makes you appreciate it more, and being able to witness, because like, you know how if you're walking in a hall and you have windows in front of you that look into a room on the other side, but picture you're looking in and the floor is lowered, like you're looking into a room, but the room is actually on a floor below you. So you're looking down into the room, and you're literally seeing these drawing easels. I say easels, but they were drawing tables with the beginning drawings of this just mega movie. And it's like, you can't comprehend it until you've actually seen it. And it's like, even at 8 years old, I couldn't really comprehend what I was seeing.
Jeez. Now, if I recall, didn't the animators also use like actual footage of lions and
That I don't know.
and
I didn't actually see the animation going on. I saw the drawings going on.
right,
And
but they had to get the right lines, like for Mufasa's face and
I don't know much about what went into making it. I just remember what I saw. Which, like I said, for me at 8 years old was a thrill. But it's like one of those things, like I said, it's one of those things that if you see the inspiration and then the beginnings of something, it really makes you appreciate the process that goes into it. And I think it gives you a stronger appreciation of the finished product.
definitely.
Like, because as far as, be it live action or animated, if there was a movie, actually both, I want to know both, for live action and animated, if there was a movie that you could have witnessed being made, which one or which would it be? Or would you not want to have looked behind the curtain, so to speak, because of the special effects that went in it that you wouldn't have necessarily seen in the making of it?
For my part, I would say either Who Framed Roger Rabbit or Jurassic Park. Any one of those.
I'm about to make you really, really mad. Um, and I'm glad that there's potentially a year until we see each other because you might forget this.
Oh.
But I was actually in the warehouse where they filmed the scene with Roger Rabbit dealing with Christopher Lloyd's buggy-eyed character. I was actually in that warehouse with all of the props and everything, and where you saw the cartoon drawing of all the characters from Toontown coming through the wall. I was actually in that warehouse
Oh my god.
because that was at Disney at the same time. That was on the Disney lot.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
God. But yeah, that's probably my favorite movie so far.
But and actually that's actually animated and live action combined. But I'm curious individually if there were a movie that was live action and a movie that was animated that you could have seen being made, which would it be? If you had to do individually, not one that has the two combined.
Oh, let's see. I'm not sure. I guess because for my part, there's the mystery to me was getting both together. So I always found it incredible that you could mix live action and animation, like with Mary Poppins, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, that sort of thing. But then
And
also, or yeah,
and now that you bring that up, it actually brings up all of the special effects that we have today. Because if you look on YouTube, you can see a lot of the behind the scenes filming of, say, the Avengers, and you have, I think it was Josh Brolin who played Thanos, or at least the voice of Thanos. You actually had Brolin walking around set with like a body harness on, with a pole coming up with a fake Thanos face, where the actors had to look, and so the camera could see them actually looking up at Thanos, but really it was just Josh Brolin that was in front of them, but he was still the voice of Thanos. So it's like there are movies that I don't necessarily know if I would want to peek behind the curtain, because I think it would take away the mystery of it.
touche. It is our ignorance that gives magic to the unknown, and it's for my part, I can appreciate the art when I know like all the work that went into making it successful. So when I see movies like Jurassic Park or Who Framed Roger Rabbit and or hell, Endgame and these Marvel movies, um, a lot of work was involved in stuff like that, and it really gives you a greater appreciation for it.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess is a slap in the face by Hollywood of the unoriginality taking place
Yeah,
so pervasively, it seems.
yeah.
Um,
Now, like we discussed in the beginning, there are movies that we know now that we grew up with that were actually remakes of movies from the early 1900s. Um, I do like that they were more, I don't want to say modernized, but I think when they remade those, it was based on the fact that they had better technology by that time. So they remade it with better technology so that it would look better.
yeah.
Um, so, um, Like there are um, Child's Play. Did you know that? Well, Child's Play isn't really a good example because it was made in '88 and then obviously is being rebooted this year. But the I think it was Babes in Toyland. Do you remember that with Laurel and Hardy?
Yeah, yeah.
That, if I can find it, Babes in Toyland, the original was done in 1934. And then they've actually done 3 remakes of that movie. Babes in Toyland, that was 1934. The first remake was in 1961. The second remake was in 1986, and the third was in 1997. And I think that's gonna lead me, unless there are other movies that you're thinking of, that's gonna lead me into my point that I want to make as far as this obsession that we're seeing now in 2019 with remaking something without you know enhancing the already established story or creating a different story if you're going to gender or ethnic swap a character. So I'm wondering, what your thoughts are as far as this insanity around feeling like they need to remake everything, because I'm always of the mindset, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the same applies to this whole debacle of remaking The Princess Bride. Like
Yeah, and I actually only saw
it's
that. I only saw that a week ago, and people are going absolutely batshit
like
online.
it's such an amazing movie. Like that, no one trusts Hollywood to touch it because they're just going to ruin it,
Yeah,
like they do with every other remake.
yeah.
But yeah, for my part, so I am a little torn because when you were talking about original stories,
Hmm.
like Shakespeare, people do tell it over and over again because tonight we're performing The Merchant of Venice, and come see blah, 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 live and what have you. So I mean, all things considered, it's the same story, but you're going to have a new generation of actors and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Kind of the sign of the times, but it's still Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice
Hmm.
or Romeo and Juliet, that sort of thing. The story itself doesn't change. It's just theater isn't recorded usually, so
Hmm.
it's unless you go into like an actual movie.
Right.
But yeah, when theater itself is very impermanent and people know that, so stories are retold, and you have a show on Broadway playing for 10 years, that sort of thing. So you kind of it's this, I would say Hollywood is doing an abuse of the privilege of recording, since
Yeah.
they already have, like, I'm not going to say you know gold on video, and then they're like, hey, this made a lot of money, let's remake it, so the new generation gets access to it. Where is that threshold where you're
Why don't you just introduce them to the original
yeah
and see if help them appreciate the original creation. But one thing I want to touch on that I actually didn't think of before we started recording that you just said was Broadway. Now, my mom was, this is going to sound horrible, so I'm going to try to explain this as best as possible so that there are no misconceptions about what I'm saying. My mom was almost a professional dancer uh, before I was born. By that, I mean that she was in stage productions of dance numbers and, different, I don't want to say plays, but if you go to like a dance recital, that's what it is. I don't want people trying to get
Ah.
it twisted and thinking that, my mom was into something salacious back in the 70s and 80s. But um, one of the things that she always talked about, I believe even before I was born, was that her dream was to be part of the Radio City Rockettes.
Oh.
And see, that's the type of dancing I mean. I don't mean anything, in a back alley bar with a bunch of drunks. Although I do know people that go that route for different reasons, but that's neither here nor there. But her doing that gave her an appreciation for stage production
Mm.
and, plays and, art that is produced on stage. That in turn, when she had me, gave me an appreciation for things that are on and off Broadway. So um, I had always wanted to see a Broadway production. Um, in what was it, 20, was it 2007, 2008, something like that. I bought sight unseen and never having had seen it before. I bought the movie Rent. Um,
Ah.
and the reason I gonna sound horrible. The whole reason I bought it was because Jesse L. Martin was in it, and at the time, I knew him from playing Ed Green, who was one of the detectives on the original Law and Order. And
Ah.
so I was familiar with him. So I was curious what this movie was, but I loved his acting enough that I wanted to see what he did in this movie. So I bought it and I absolutely fell in love with it. Um, it's not a it's not a stage production in a movie. It's actually a movie in, real life. You're in, the, Bohemia of New York City. Like you're in that type of neighborhood. And I'm like, you know what? If I'm gonna see something on stage, it's gonna be this. Lo and behold, 3 years later, I got to see it in Schenectady, New York,
Oh.
on stage. Not only that, a lot of the original cast from the stage performance was in the movie version. I actually got to meet two of the original cast members from who were in the for stage performance and the movie at this stage performance in Schenectady, New York. And it was one of the most life altering experiences I've ever had. Um, so I definitely want to see. I don't know if there's a movie of it, but I want to see Wicked on stage and in movie form. I think the movie is just a video of a stage performance of it. I don't know, but that made me want to see Wicked. Um, but it's just like I know that there were different concessions they had to make um, as far as scenery when it came to going into the movie because they actually had more abilities. So they did have to alter things a little because they had more 3D structures to work with
Mm.
than just stage props. Um, so when I went to, I think it might have been a downfall that I saw the movie first and then saw the stage production. Even though I had seen other dance recitals and stage productions before, I knew what I was getting myself into. So I knew how to appreciate stage productions. So I don't think I necessarily missed out on anything seeing the stage production. I appreciated it just as much as the movie. But there are different things that you have to understand that are going to either be different or not exist in switching from one form to the other.
Yeah. I mean, no matter what media you use, a lot of work does go into everything. If you're on a theater, you have that frame of the proscenium that you have to work with, like that fourth wall, and then the audience sees the rest of it. But when you're doing a movie, you have to decide what's the best camera angle and the good shot, good lighting, that sort of thing. There's just a lot of work that has to go into an art piece. And I hate to say it, a lot of Hollywood now is just recycling old treasure.
Yeah. Like, there was talk, I don't know if it's gonna happen. There was talk of rebooting the entire Pirates of the Caribbean franchise with a female pirate, like a female Captain Jack. I don't know if it would necessarily be the same character, but I don't know if they plan on telling a different story from a female perspective, or they're telling the same story. I don't know if it was determined or if it was just a hope, but I think a lot of people were hoping that Keira Knightley was going to be the pirate that replaced Captain Jack, because she was in the original movies.
Yeah.
I think people wanted it to be from her perspective, but I don't know if that concept ever went anywhere. But I think what we're seeing a lot today is a lot of unoriginality and pandering. And I'm being somebody who is, I'm not using this as a way to describe me. I'm just saying how other people have chosen to label or describe me. Being that I'm told I'm part of a protected class, because of being in the wheelchair. I guess I'm supposed to be of the mindset that I want to be represented in movies. And while that is true, and I do appreciate when I see somebody in a movie or on TV that is in a wheelchair and seeing how they navigate, I don't need them to be. It doesn't matter to me whether they're male or female, and it doesn't matter to me what skin color they are, because those characteristics to me don't make the personality. Your personality comes with how you navigate your life. You and I were talking before we started recording, the TV show Black Lightning. There was a character who got injured, who ended up in a wheelchair for a short time. Now, I have been in a wheelchair my entire life. He was an up and walking person who I believe was a football player and got injured because he got shot and it severed his spinal cord. So he was in a wheelchair. Now, if anybody who's familiar with Black Lightning knows that it's primarily an all black cast. When I'm watching that show, I'm not paying attention to the fact that they are, whether they are black or any other, ethnicity. That doesn't matter to me. I'm seeing how they interact with each other as actors. I'm seeing, because I can actually figure that out. I've been around enough people who are acting that I can see whether they're acting in character or whether they're just behaving naturally amongst each other. The actor who played this character who ended up in a wheelchair, the actor himself is not in a wheelchair. And I actually had the opportunity to meet him when you and I went to Atlanta. And I told him, I'm like, I understand that there's this craze and this hunger for being represented on screen. And I told him straight out, like, I don't need somebody to look like me to be in a wheelchair. I don't need somebody who is in a wheelchair to act that part out. I'm like, I just want somebody who's going to be willing to learn about that character and play them to the best of their ability. And I told him that I greatly appreciated how he portrayed a special needs person for that short time that he was in the chair. And, he and I really connected on that. The one thing you and I actually haven't talked about, there was actually, we've talked about the movie, but not in this context. There was a movie back in the late 80s, early 90s called Mac and Me. And the main character was in a wheelchair and he had spina bifida. I actually didn't know until I was a teenager that the actor himself had spina bifida. So he was in a wheelchair naturally. And I think it shocked me, but it didn't change how I felt about him or about the character. I didn't automatically think, oh, that's why he played it so well. It's like I've seen. This is going to sound bad, but I will say that I think when you are, say, a person who is ambulatory, up and walking, if you're asked to play somebody who is a special needs character, I think you're going to play it to the best of your ability, and you're probably going to play it more because you're not comfortable doing it. So you're going to try and make it appear the best you can. And that's why I love when somebody who isn't something ends up playing something that they're not, because it helps them evolve as a person. It helps them evolve their craft. And I think it helps them understand the type of character that they're playing and the real world people that deal with what they played as a character.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sign of a good actor, actress, that they have to embody this character.
Mm-hmm.
And when they learn the proper ways to represent character X, that's what they're aiming for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's all part of a team. You got the actor, the fellow actors, actresses, the director. They're all striving for believability. Granted, as an audience, there is a thing called suspension of disbelief, but ideally, if there's a story being told mostly in real life, and you strive for realism, that's the sign of a good actor is making it believable. So that they get all the information that they can, to make it happen.
Yeah.
What was it? The Theory of Everything with Eddie Redmayne. He played Stephen Hawking, and you could see him regress into the symptoms of ALS, and he did a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
And they with the hair and the makeup, he almost looked just like Stephen Hawking.
The one thing that got me into kind of the nerd world, so to speak, was when I used to wake up on Saturday mornings and watch Saturday morning cartoons, because at the time there was an animated version of the X-Men. That was my first introduction to Professor X. I know in the cartoon, he was in this gigantic, oversized yellow hovercraft type of thing. Like I never saw him in a manual wheelchair. Um, but I mean, it intrigued me that I never saw him walking. And I think at that age, it didn't really click in my head. But I will say that once I started seeing the movies in the early 2000s, it fascinated me to see Patrick Stewart play him.
Mm.
And obviously, I knew from Star Trek Next Generation that Patrick Stewart was not naturally in a wheelchair, but I adored Patrick Stewart. So I knew, in my eyes, he could do no wrong. So it seemed natural to me to see him as Professor X because before I don't know if you know this, but before he played Professor X, when they approached him, he said, "I don't know anything about these characters. I've never read a comic book." They handed him a picture, or they handed him a comic book of the X-Men. He opened it and saw Professor X. He goes, "Why am I in a comic book?" And it's one of those things like with the comic book that you and I are doing. I think that is, why it's so important to draw characters that we can base in reality so that, if we find if we end up putting a character in our comic book that's in a wheelchair, um, it doesn't if the person if we end up making it into a movie or a TV show, if we find a person that aesthetically looks like that person but isn't naturally in a wheelchair, that's not going to matter to me. If they're willing to play a character in a wheelchair, that is what's going to matter to me
Mm.
because it's going to teach them. And I think everything needs to be a teachable moment because it's going to if they are willing to play a character in a wheelchair while they themselves are not naturally in a wheelchair, I think that it's going to help them expand their worldview because it's going to give them a perspective that they didn't previously have.
Yeah, I agree. And for what it's worth, it's probably going to be more difficult to find an actor in a wheelchair per se than it is to find any actor and be like, hey, can you play someone who needs
Yeah,
a
but
wheelchair?
we can't if we put a character in the movie that we're doing or in the comic book, we can't bank on somebody that looks like that character eventually naturally being in a wheelchair.
Mm.
So, and because you know, I think the number of people that are in a wheelchair is not as large as you would think it is. So I think that as long as somebody can, properly portray a character, it doesn't matter what their background is as long as they can dive into that role wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I agree. I, it takes. I mean, that's why we use actors. They
Yeah.
have the talents and the skill to portray another person besides themselves, and that's kind of. Uh, so I mean, once you pick, the actor you want for the part, um, it's just a matter of getting them into character, directing them how you see the story going, and that sort of
Hmm.
thing, and then take it from there. You got a movie. So
Yeah. Um, One of the things, because I want you to be able to express the thoughts and opinions that you were expressing to me before we started recording. Um, but are you familiar? Do they ever in school make you do the mock trials where even if they put you on the side of the prosecution, you still had to make a case for the defense so that you understood both sides? Are you familiar?
Uh,
Are you at least familiar with that concept?
oh yeah. I don't think I ever actually did it. I mostly stayed away from debates in school.
Well, I know the perspective you had before we started recording, based on, you know, inclusion and representation, um, in TV and cinema. So I want you to be able to express your thoughts on that. But I want to see if you can kind of give the counter argument as to why what they're doing, because I understand the prospect of, what they are trying to do or what their intention is, but I think what they're actually doing is pandering. So I want to know what your perspective is as far as that.
I mean, for what it's worth, I am all for inclusivity and representation, that sort of thing. But it also has to be purposeful. When you are pandering to an audience, it can show through, and it looks like just a superficial, tokenistic gesture. Um, but like we were discussing earlier, like with the actors portraying the heroes in the Marvel movies, not all of them look exactly like their comic book doppelganger. There
Right.
have been changes. Um,
I think they just got lucky with Robert Downey Jr. because holy shit.
well, he's also playing himself, so
Well, I mean, I don't think he was Tony Stark before he started playing that role. Now he is. Like he is, I think he has kind of embraced that role, even though now he has made statements, you guys have to realize I'm not that character. I do think that he actually got so far into that role that he ended up becoming him in some sort of way, because he is now, I don't know if he's a billionaire, but I know that he's extremely wealthy because of that role.
mm,
I don't. He's not a playboy because he's married, but he is very much a philanthropist, and he's interested in technology, and he's interested in that from a philanthropic standpoint, from what I understand. Because what he's doing now is he's going into a lot of the environmental conservation stuff and understanding technology in that realm.
oh, very cool. Because yeah, we definitely need help in that realm.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's for another podcast.
yeah. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
But yeah, for my part, I mean, I've been very happy with the Marvel movies.
Hmm.
I was never a diehard fan of the comics because as a kid, I didn't have the funds to give, you know, $3 every week for a comic book. So I'm like, I
Yeah.
had to, budget myself and be like, okay, well, I'll just invest in the action figures because those will linger for a while and
Yeah.
I get to play with them. But yeah, uh, for like the casting changes in the Marvel movies, like I don't really care.
Yeah.
I'm like, you tell a good story. There are amazing characters. Um, the only thing I am anti, if I can say that, is the amount of homework you have to do in order to keep up with the Marvel movies.
Oh yeah, I know.
Uh,
Um,
if
but
I don't see like one movie of the Hulk or Spider-Man or something, like I'm totally lost in what the hell happened in Infinity War and yeah.
the I will say the one thing that you brought up um off stream was, and this is something I hadn't been aware of until like the last 2 or 3 years, because it really hadn't been brought up. And the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been around since Iron Man was released in 2008. Um, I didn't realize that Nick Fury was a white person in the comics, and because nobody pitched a fit when Sam Jackson played him. So it never occurred to me to even pay attention to um, the difference in skin color, because Sam Jackson to me is a god. Like he can do no wrong. I love what he does. So, and it sounds like based on the way they write the character for the movies that he obviously does a great job.
Hmm.
I will say the only one that people I tend not to remember that was switched out, um, although it wasn't an ethnic swap. Um, if you remember from the first Iron Man to the second Iron Man, James Rhodes was different. In the first Iron
Oh.
Man in 2008, he was played by Cuba Gooding Jr. In the second Iron Man, it switched to Don Cheadle, who has played him since. And
Really?
it was because Don Cheadle as a person, or not Don Cheadle, I'm sorry, Cuba Gooding Jr. as a person really started getting mouthy and hostile with the executives at Marvel and was just not easy to work with. And he still holds a grudge. He actually holds a grudge personally against Robert Downey Jr. for some reason.
Huh.
But you know,
Sorry, watch that.
I do think I never really liked the character of Rhodey until Don Cheadle stepped in because I think the way that they write him, I think Don Cheadle does better.
Mm.
I think he's able to make it look more natural. There it seemed very it seemed very awkward for Cuba Gooding Jr. in my opinion. Just because you see how he's portrayed by Don Cheadle, and then you look at the way he was portrayed by Cuba Gooding Jr., and it's two completely different characters. It's completely different portrayals of the same character.
Interesting. And you said that was in the first Iron Man?
Yeah, Cuba Gooding Jr. was in the first one, and then Don Cheadle has played him ever since Iron Man 2.
Interesting. And it's been years since I last saw Iron Man 1.
Hmm.
I'm going to have to revisit that because I did not notice. And again, I forget the time span it took from the time I saw Iron Man 1 from Iron Man 2, but I cannot picture anyone else besides Don Cheadle in that role.
Hmm.
That is so weird.
Yeah. So because there's always these things online that talk about, oh, characters that were replaced that you never really, or realized or recognized. And see, I knew I paid it close attention, so I knew that, Rhodey had changed from Iron Man 1 to Iron Man 2. So, but it didn't bother me because it was, I like the portrayal better from Don Cheadle. Um,
Oh
but
wait,
what?
I'm sorry. So was it? I'm looking at Terrence Howard.
I'm sorry. Wow. Yeah, you're right. It was Terrence Howard.
Okay.
Wow. Like I can't. I wish you would have. Wow. That's my mistake. Um, and I'm actually glad we don't have anybody in the live chat blowing me up right now. Yeah, you're completely right. It was Terrence Howard. Um,
I mean, I have to admit, him and Cuba Gooding Jr. could probably be brothers, but
yeah, and I think it has to do with the same type of haircut.
yeah.
I think that's what confused me was the haircut, because it's very military-ish. I think the difference between Terrence Howard and Cuba Gooding Jr. is I think that Cuba Gooding Jr. I think his hair is a little bit curlier, and I think Terrence Howard is maybe just a little bit more um, militarily framed.
You know what? I have to admit, Terrence Howard does look more buff, whereas Don Cheadle, I think has more of a smaller frame.
Yeah, he definitely has a smaller frame. Um, but yeah, I mean, like I said, if you're telling a great story, I don't care what the character looks like. I don't care, or I don't care, if the actor is this or if the actor is that. It's like people need to, when people want representation in TV and movies, I understand the visual aspect of it, but you can't let your visual characteristics define you. And that's what bothers me because, like I said, for somebody like me, I don't care who's portraying somebody in a wheelchair. It's my lifestyle that I want to see portrayed. And if somebody that isn't naturally in a wheelchair picks up that role and portrays it beautifully, I'm going to appreciate the way that they did it. I don't care what they look like. I don't care if it's a male. I don't care if it's a female. I don't care what color of the rainbow you are. If you can properly depict the lifestyle of a character that may be based in reality, all power to you.
Yeah.
I think that doing something based on visual characteristics is extremely superficial.
And for my part, I have to kudos to Marvel for taking that jump because they did incorporate a very diverse cast. When I saw like Endgame, when you see everybody, like all the heroes come together, you get like the full. I don't know if I say full gamut, but you get a huge range of a very, I guess I can say representative of society. You had men, women, no matter, you had, Black Panther next to Falcon and, Iron Man and Spider-Man. Hell, you had, well, actually, no, I wish I could have seen more of the Hulk. I think he could have really shown.
The Hulk was a bitch in that movie. The Hulk was just a big bitch in that movie,
I was hoping,
and Bruce Banner told him so.
I was a little disappointed in the Hulk, I have to admit, but he's one of my favorites. I would have loved to see him like full rage. I just thought, him in the face of Thanos, maybe like.
Well, we saw
I don't
him.
know,
We saw him and Thanos square off in Thor Ragnarok.
still didn't do very well. Yeah,
No,
I
he
have to
didn't.
admit, but
But I mean, I think that it's just, I would rather see people who can portray a person well rather than seeing somebody who looks exactly like me. I don't need to see somebody who looks exactly like me. I'm more interested in who they are as a person, not what they look like as a person.
yeah, and honestly, if you're a good actor, actress, then you should be good to play almost any role.
Hmm.
I mean, you may have to factor in a few, historical facts and that sort of thing to make it a little bit more believable. But
Yeah.
once you get that down, when it doesn't matter, who's playing Romeo or Juliet or that sort of thing. Um, it comes down to the acting, and
Hmm.
that's
And
the crux
I
of it.
think if an actor or actress is extremely excited about playing a role that is out of their own personal characteristic, I think that tells me more because I want to see the love and or compassion they give to the characters they play.
Hmm.
If I have a character who wants to learn more about a lifestyle that they're not familiar with, I'm more interested in learning experiences and them learning something from their experience than I am necessarily seeing somebody who already has spina bifida play that role, because it doesn't matter if they have spina bifida and I can visually, see that. If they're a shitty actor, I'm not going to want to see that movie.
The crux of a movie or a show or what have you, it's telling a story. So when you have a good cast and good writers, good directors, that sort of thing, you can usually tell a story very well. But it can all break down with shitty writing, shitty directing, shitty actors. It doesn't make the story believable. Like it doesn't jump out at you as, oh, this is a story I can really, relate to, or these characters I can relate to, that, that sort of thing. It can take you out of the the storytelling, and that's no fun for anyone. So,
and one of the things is, I think that Marvel is a good measurement of, how good an actor or actress's craft can develop, and how well it can develop. Because Don Cheadle, Scarlett Johansson, and a whole host of other people, Chris Evans, they were all fairly well known because of work that they had previously done. But whether they matched up to the characters in the comic book or not, they have become these larger than life people because of the characters they played. And whether they, like I said, whether they matched up, explicitly with the people they were playing, they did it in such a way that they almost have become these untouchable people, because they can do no wrong. Like, I don't care what other roles Robert Downey Jr. takes on. I'm going to start seeing the movies that he's, doing after this. Like, I don't particularly like the whole Sherlock Holmes thing, but because he was in those, I will see them, because I'm curious to see how he portrayed that character. And it's one of those things where I would rather diversify my understanding of people whose lifestyles I don't live than to constantly play somebody who is in a wheelchair, because it's and actually, I think this is a one of the movies that Chris Evans was in early on. I think it was called Not Another Teen Movie, and you had the guy from SNL, the black guy from SNL, who played the token black guy in Not Another Teen Movie, and he called himself the token black guy. So it's like, you got to wonder, if you get these, actors and actresses that are, playing these roles because of the way that they look and not their craft, it's disrespectful to the actors and actresses in a certain way.
Yeah. Because I know for my part, like, again, I'm a white male. So there's been a lot of representation for the past 100 years in cinema, TV, that sort of thing.
But even you said that you wish there was more representation of people that looked like you, which I understand, because you're not Arnold Schwarzenegger. You're more, and I say this with the utmost love and respect, you're more Revenge of the Nerds than you are Terminator.
Yeah.
Um, So, I mean, but knowing you as long as I have, you have never defined yourself by your gender or your skin color. You've always defined yourself by the things that you're interested in and the things that you're capable of doing. So to look at you, I don't care that you're a guy. I don't care that you're, white or whatever. I care about the things that interest you because that tells me who you are.
Right. But again, there are other people who are, you know, themselves, and I and again, I'm only guessing. I can't say for certain because I don't know what it's like to be, a woman or African American or stuff like
See, the
that.
thing is, if you watch the news today, if you or I wanted to see what it was like to be an African American, we would probably get slapped with a hate crime.
Uh, right. But I mean, there's been a lot of history of struggle.
But the,
Um,
but the thing is, there's been a history of struggle, and I don't want to veer too far off, the main topic, but you know, I think that people need to stop viewing themselves and defining themselves by immutable characteristics that they can't change. I want people that are going to define themselves by the things that interest them or the things that they're capable of doing. That tells me what type of character they are, because it's irrelevant to me what you look like.
and that's another point. I would love for this compromise to take place where an actor or an actress is cast solely on their performance. So when I see someone who that in a Disney movie was white because on Kristen Anderson stories like that, I guess that's what Disney only drew from. Um, when
Well, but like you and I were talking about before, I don't know if we've said it on stream yet, but you have to you have to create based on what you know, and you have to create based on what you're familiar with. Maybe when these things were made, they weren't familiar with certain things, but it doesn't mean that you have to completely deconstruct a character that you've already made just to pander to a new group of people, because it's actually what people don't realize, it's actually disrespectful to that group of people, because you're not changing the story. You're just changing what the person looks like. You're not changing their their circumstances. You're not changing their story. You're putting them in a story that already exists that has nothing to do with them. So they're not really being, like, visually, they're being represented, but their individuality is not.
right, so when there when there's a necessity where people should look like where they're from, like in Aladdin. Um,
Or when you and I were talking about the remake of One Day at a Time, the TV series from the 70s. Originally, the series was all white people with, recurring characters that were of different ethnic backgrounds. But when they remade it specifically for Netflix, it centered around a family that had come from Cuba, but they didn't tell the same story from the 70s. They told the story of this Cuban family. And that's what I loved, because I learned about what, Cuban immigrants go through. I didn't hear a story that I had already heard before with different people. I actually learned about them and what defines them characteristically. It didn't matter that they were, not white. It didn't matter that they weren't all male or all female.
mm,
It told me about their lifestyle, their background, what actually defines them as a person.
Yeah, so you kind of have these two different realms where it's a very purposeful representation, um, and which is required. Like in Aladdin, if I saw a white guy playing Aladdin, it would have taken me out of the movie. I'd be like, that's a
If you
little
think
weird.
about it, though, when they drew Aladdin in the animated series, I actually didn't know that he was supposed to be darker. He looked white to me.
Uh, and it depends
But
on
I
the
will say,
colorization.
I will say, it confused me because everybody else around him was not white, except for the Sultan. The Sultan was white. The Sultan was almost paper white. So
Interesting.
that did confuse me, but um, I think there are more arguments to be made about, or more arguments to be made for when you draw certain characters to make them look like people in real life.
Mm,
But it goes back to the people creating these things have to have the right experiences in life to be able to talk about it. Like you and I, with the movie that we're doing, the two main characters, or the main character and her, supporting character, are female, and they are in a relationship together. I based that off of friends that I have. I'm not
mm,
Obviously I'm not female, and I'm not a lesbian. So I'm not taking from personal experience, but I know enough based on the friends that I have to be able to properly develop a character like that.
mm.
And it's I think that people need to focus on character development instead of, physical characteristics that are immutable.
Yeah, and when it doesn't matter, that's the other realm that I wanted to allude to. That when it doesn't matter the skin color, gender, sex, whatever of a character, then they can be played by anyone.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the nice malleability of actors, actresses, that sort of thing.
Well,
Um,
and that leads into the Little Mermaid, or the remake that they're trying to make right now. Is I think because Hans Christian Andersen, I think he was the one that wrote that one. Um, they took from that story. He was writing and creating his characters based on the people he saw around them.
hmm,
The only, and I will not back down from this. The only reason that they made Ariel black for the remake that they're making is to pander. They're not changing the story. They're not changing her background. They're not changing a damn thing about the original, creation, other than the fact that she was black, other than the fact that she is black. And I don't have a problem with the fact that she's black, because she's part fish. Fish are all sorts of colors. What I don't like is the pandering, because you know, people are too focused on the superficial characteristics of what they're seeing instead of really getting into the character of the person. Because when she gets on screen, she may be a horrible actress.
but I also don't think they would have cast her if she was horrible. If she
True,
proved herself
but the
in,
thing is, like, you shouldn't care what a fish looks like, because they actually say that in the lore of mermaids, they live so far down in the bottom of the sea that they don't get sunlight. So I mean, it is arguable that they could be darker. So I get that, but they're not basing it on that. They're not advertising it on as based on that. What they're doing is they are pandering to a woke outrage culture and trying to cash grab based on that. They think that, pandering to these people is going to get them money. They're not doing it for the sake of doing it for the good of, the story. They're doing it for a cash grab. And that's what I don't like about woke outrage culture.
I mean, for my part, I mean, it being a Hans Christian Andersen story, if as long as the what Danes is it?
I don't
Is
know.
that,
I know I think it's Nordic, like in that general area. I don't
all
know.
right. I mean, it's a European nation, but also my argument is that mermaids are fictitious, so they can look like whatever.
Right. But I just think that seeing how many people or seeing how many movies and TV shows are being changed for the sake of just gender swapping or doing an ethnic swap for the sake of, people's feels, like getting them right in the feels. I hate that.
Uh,
If you're doing it to, you know, tell a different story or to enhance the story in some way, I'm all for it. But if you're just doing it for a cash grab because people are going to do it because they feel good about it, then I think you're a horrible human being.
uh, I mean, I guess I'm gonna have to see the movie, but for my part, if she's playing Ariel, I don't care. Um, I mean, for my part, I think it just adds to the I don't know exotic nature of
Yeah.
a mermaid, or at
I
least
just
a
I just wish that they wouldn't I just wish that their reasons for doing things weren't so geared toward, pandering and, you know, just kind of bending the knee to, an outrage culture just for the sake of doing it. They're doing it for the sake of doing it and doing it for the sake of making money. And that to me is degrading to any art form.
I'll have to admit if it is pandering, then that's just a superficial cash grab.
And it
Um,
actually goes that actually goes towards what we were talking about too, is um, transferring mediums from animated um, to live action. Because if the live action movie is bad and we criticize it, there are a lot of us that are going to be called racists because they're automatically going to say, "Oh, you're only criticizing it because Ariel's black." It's like, no, if the writing's bad, I'm going to sit there and say the writing's bad.
yeah,
That's why I don't like all of these swaps, because you can't, if you're going to criticize it based on the portrayal, the art portrayal, the artistic, means of it, you're still going to get these outrage mobs saying that, you're a hateful person because you're criticizing it for this, that, and the other reason. It's like, no, if it's a terrible piece of art, I'm gonna criticize it.
yeah. I mean, as long as there has to be a reason for the constructive criticism. Um,
But the
but
thing is, even if it is constructive criticism, like with Rotten Tomatoes, when Captain Marvel came out, there were a lot of people who had seen it that absolutely just did not like the movie. And, Rotten Tomatoes allows you to, vote it up or vote it down and leave a comment. But these people that genuinely didn't like it, Rotten Tomatoes actually took away the ability to comment unless you prove that you saw the movie, because they were saying that it was just a bunch of trolls that were trying to persuade people not to go see the movie. It's like, I
mhm.
understand that bad news travels faster than good news, but you know, if you're criticizing it, based on facts and things that you can prove, there's still going to be somebody that says you're just, criticizing it because you don't, or you're a hateful person, or, they're going to have an issue. And that's why I don't like, catering to this woke culture. And that's why with our stuff that we're doing, I haven't really done that.
I mean, I have to admit, because I don't really care what people think, so I have no idea what's going on in this outrage culture, or what I've read about woke culture is I'm glad it's happening, but it needs to happen. I guess respectfully.
Yeah,
Don't be superficial about it, but like
I just don't think their reasons are noble. I don't think that the reason that they're doing it, I don't think it's any of it's noble.
like self-righteousness for
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, growing pains, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm hoping in years to come, things will just normalize and
Or something's going to become the new normal. And I think that unfortunately, we're just going to have to find a way to adapt, which I think as humans we can, because we've adapted over hundreds of years. But it's just there are certain things that we shouldn't have to be forced to adapt to. And I think that's what's happening right now. But yeah, I think, you know, like I said, as far as with you and I creating what we're doing, I just hope that you know people understand that we're writing and creating based on the things that we can draw from that we've experienced in our own lives, whether it be personally or we've experienced with other people in our lives. So I just hope that people understand that. And I think that's just the kind of the goal, is that I hope people can appreciate it for what it is and not want to change it for their own selfish reasons. And I think that a lot of it is selfish.
well, money talks.
Yeah. But yeah, as for anybody who sees this after it goes up as a video, please feel free to comment down below, and we will, with the projects that we are doing, if you would be interested in helping us further them along, I will leave links down below as to how you can contribute. With what we are doing with the comic book so far, because the movie isn't far enough along, but we've decided that anybody who helps contribute monetarily to the comic book, you will get your name in liner notes in the back pages of the first issue. So if you would like to be part of that effort, definitely I will leave information in the description below. But that is where we have to end today. And we will talk to everybody next Wednesday, hopefully at the same or at the normal time, but it depends on what our schedules are doing. So we will see everybody next week.
See ya.